So once we've been producing a crop and growing it, let's take lavender, for example. The seeds come from our own farms. So we take a portion of the crop and we hold it back, harvesting the remainder of the crop for distillation of essential oils. And the area of the field that has the greatest, longest, healthiest plants get harvested for seed. And then we can replant those same seeds year after year after year. In the event that it's a new crop that we haven't used before, then it's about a 3-year process of research and development to make sure that we have exactly the right genetics grown in exactly the right environmental conditions. So we're testing in a greenhouse, we test in the soils in the field to ensure that the oil constituency that comes from that plant matches exactly a full spectrum that's needed for effective pure essential oils. Upon confirming that we have the right genetics and that it can produce essential oils that meet our specs, then we can start to reproduce our own seed and then develop and expand and grow.
Wow, it seems like there's a whole science behind just the simple act of seed selection. It sounds simple, but the science behind it sounds quite mind-boggling.
You know, it's interesting. It's really very, very simple. However, Young Living takes a lot of extra steps to make sure that we have exactly the right seed. Because what happens with the seed when it's grown, let's take... I keep going back to lavender. It's one that I've used as an example before. Lavandula angustifolia is English lavender, and that's the lavender that we use. But there are 187 subspecies of Lavandula angustifolia. So if you were to contact a seed vendor or a seed store and buy Lavandula angustifolia, you could receive any one of 187 different subspecies of that seed. And it's going to have a different genetic expression of essential oil. And so we have to test and retest and ensure that we have exactly the right genetics so that it can develop the full spectrum of constituents that we're looking for in our oil. It's really quite an involved process as well. And you know, sometimes you wonder, why would anybody go to such length to take care of the microbiology and the microbiome and the soil tilt and the organic content of the soil? It's because that all enables the plant to reach its full potential. But what we do when, let's say we're ready to rotate crops and we're taking lavender out, and we might come in with clary sage or goldenrod or another crop that would follow. When we take that crop out of the field, next we come in with a multi-species cover crop. And the different species of plants in that cover crop are different for different regions. So the cover crop we use in Idaho is different from the cover crop we're going to use in Taiwan or in Ecuador or in Idaho. Okay, so the species of plants in that mix are selected specific to the soil that's being grown there, because each plant will exude or kick out different chelates and acids into the soil to help promote and regenerate soil health. And then when we plow them into the ground, they have different properties. Some are legumes, which means they fix nitrogen into the soil. Some plants like mustard and sorghum sudan grass give off a cyanide gas when they're plowed under, and it naturally kills a negative insect or negative bug called a nematode that chews our roots. So in fields where we have this nematode, we can naturally fumigate by plowing in mustard and sorghum sudan grass. Without having to spray any chemicals or anything on the soil, we've taken care of our insect problem. So what blend of plants we use in that crop rotation really depends on what the needs are of that soil. Now, I know that's a lot, but that's only one of about 15 steps. Next follows the addition of organic compost that again is specially formulated for the soils. We use a mushroom compost at Mona. We use worm castings in Ecuador, a fish waste compost in Idaho. And you'll notice that those, while they're different for every region, it's a similar concept. And the purpose of each of those blends is unique to the soils that they're being applied to. So we go in, we pull a soil sample, figure out what's needed, study it under a microscope, and then apply the appropriate compost back to the soil. A lot of the commercial agriculture in the world is take. The secret to regenerative and sustainable agriculture is to give back to Mother Earth. And we do that between every crop. The next part and piece is the microbiome and the microbiology. When Gary first began, he studied the microbiology of the soil and the interactions of the microbes and the bacteria and the mycorrhizal fungi and those interactions with the roots in the plant, enabling that plant to fully develop its expression of essential oils. And so we reproduce this bacteria and these microbes in a large tank with air. And it gets aerated, they get excited, they start reproducing, and about every 14 minutes they'll double in population. So after 4 or 5 days of cooking a batch of microbes, we'll have literally billions of microbes that we can put back on the soil to help sustainably regenerate nutrients naturally for the plant. That's a great question. And so I mentioned earlier that we soil test. They say, in God we trust, all others bring data. So we've got to go out and test the soil and see exactly what we're dealing with. And then we prepare our microbiology, we prepare our compost so that we know what we're putting back on will meet the needs of the plant. We test with some scientific instruments the sap of the plant. So when we're at the right growth stage, about 2 weeks before we anticipate harvesting, we start testing with a Brix meter that measures the sugar content in the leaves. And so scientifically, we watch the sugar come up in the plant. And it's different for every crop, for every plant. But once it reaches the threshold for that plant, we know that that plant has had time to fully develop all of its essential oil constituents. Then we watch Mother Nature. I'll give you an example. This last year, goldenrod harvest, there were a whole bunch of bees out in the flowers of the goldenrod. And I went out at 9:30 in the morning, just ready to get ready to harvest. And it wasn't quite the right time. Think about a tulip plant, a tulip flower. In the daytime, when the sun's out, that flower's wide open and it smells nice. What happens at night?
Does it close up?
Closes up.
Oh, it does.
It closes up at night, like a dandelion or a tulip. They close up at night, and they don't smell the same when they're closed as they do when they're open. All of the constituents of the essentials have come back into the crown of the plant. And then once the sun comes out and the flower opens up, all of those essentials come back out to the ends in the floral parts of the plant. That's when we want to harvest. If we harvest too early or when it's overcast and rainy, many of those components may still be down in the crown of the plant. So we test with the scientific instruments and we watch Mother Nature. So this last fall, I was watching the goldenrod harvest, and I went out at about 9:45. And there were a whole bunch of bees on the underside, just hanging on like this, on the underside of the flower, just waiting. Nothing.
Were they waiting for the flowers to open up?
They were waiting for all of the essentials to be out there.
Wow.
I watched my watch, and about 9:46, they're still hanging on the underside. And I turn around to get a drink, and when I look back at like 9:47, all the bees in the whole area were just going crazy, loving it, because now the game is on. All the constituents are out. The bees could smell it, and they were ready to get the pollen and harvest themselves. And we knew then, both by testing with a scientific instrument coupled with nature, that, yep, it's time to harvest. And so then as we're harvesting, we continue to test and make sure that conditions haven't changed and that we're still in the prime of harvesting. Essential oil science stems back thousands of years. And so when Gary started to study essential oils, he went back to Indian tribes and to India and to other areas of the world where those sciences were first studied and first understood, to Egypt, to Oman for frankincense and studied in the native lands where those sciences and those materials were used. And then starting with that history as a basis, he sought out individuals who knew more than he did or knew something different than him. And this was really a guide to all of us farm managers now at Young Living to not let well enough alone. Just because I know how to grow lavender doesn't mean I shouldn't continue to study and learn and reach out to others that know more than me. And what happens as Gary studied and learned, he started to build a basis or a foundation that we continue on today. So a lot of research and development with every plant, with every type of essential oil. Let's distill the entire. So for example, let me go back. I want to go back and talk about a plant that we recently started growing, valerian. It's one that commonly has been used just the root. But to make sure that we still want to only distill just the root, which is what has been done for centuries and for generations, we've gone back and tested every single part of the plant. Leaves only, flowers only, flowers and leaves together, flowers, leaves, and stems together, flowers, leaves, stems, roots, roots only, etc. Every combination tested at different pressures, different temperatures, different timing, and look at the constituents. It takes a tremendous amount of time and a tremendous amount of resources to not only test that once, but to continue testing it to reinsure that we're still doing the very best that's possible. And it's just an ongoing process. But Gary, and you ask, how do we know all this? Gary Young is the pioneer of essential oils. And so we build on his foundation and we continue to study and grow with our team. So one of the things that's really amazing about Young Living is everything that we do, we go above and beyond. And it really stems true with our quality control. This is every area that we've talked about is really a differentiator between Young Living and any other essential oil company out there. But when it comes to quality control and how we ensure the purity of our oils is definitely a differentiator. The vast majority of essential oil companies in the industry use 1 to 3 instruments to test their essential oils. The most common is a gas chromatograph. And this is a great instrument to use in a laboratory. It will show how much of each constituent is in the essential oil. And that's great. But it does not have the capability to distinguish whether or not that constituent is natural and made by a plant or whether that constituent was fabricated in a lab with synthetics. Scientists today are amazing. They can break any substance down to the molecular level and build it back synthetically. So using a GC, I can tell the constituents, and yep, it's all here, but I can't tell if it was natural or synthetic. They may also use a pH sensor and some other instruments to test quality. Take a wild guess how many different instruments are used at Young Living to ensure quality.
9.
Okay, great guess. It's actually 15.
Wow.
15 different tests.
Not even close. Wow.
All 15 have to come back absolutely positive. Each has a distinct measure. Now let me explain why. Let's use a test. What is 3 plus 4?
7.
And 5 plus 2?
7 as well.
And 6 plus 1?
Still 7.
They're all 7. So we get the same result, but you may not know if the answer is 7. Did I get 7 from 3 plus 4? Or did I get 7 from 5 plus 2? Right? So all the different instruments enable us to ensure not only are all of the constituents there, are they pure? Were they naturally produced? Etc. and so on and so forth. And so we're checking to ensure. Can I share a little example?
Go ahead.
All right. So I want you to hold your hand in front of you.
Let me move this away.
Okay. So hold your hand out in front of you like this.
Yep.
Okay. This is what's called an allele isotope.
Okay.
They're not superimposable.
Okay.
They're mirror images of one another.
Right.
Okay. So with a synthetic substance, it creates automatically, because of biochemistry and science of creating a synthetic substance, it creates an allele isotope. So when we run it through not a gas chromatograph, that's a near infrared photospectrometer, I believe. The science that's in our labs and that Dr. Book takes care of is way over my head. But the instrument itself is able to pick out exactly that allele isotope. And only that instrument can do that. Why do we care? Well, let's take lemon, for example. Limonene is the primary constituent in lemon essential oil. Okay. And when we have a naturally produced Young Living essential oil, there's one single spike of limonene in the graph. When it's synthetic, there are two spikes side by side.
Right.
And we can tell immediately if that oil has been adulterated or is synthetic or has had anything done to it. Okay. So this is just an example of the depth that Young Living goes to and the extent that we go to that no one else in the world even comes close. So all of our oils are tested in triplicate through 15 machines, different tests that they run through. And then if it all passes, it goes into the bottle. Then guess what happens? We pull samples of those bottles and we run it all through again.
Wow.
One more time, all 15 tests, all in triplicate to ensure that the final product going out the door is effective. It has all the constituents to be able to support our natural wellness. Wow. At the end of the day, this essential oil is going to go on my son or your daughter, right? And so it matters. What breaks my heart is in this role that I'm currently in as Agronomist Global Farms, I know exactly how many acres of lavender are grown in the world, how many acres of helichrysum, where all the rose is coming from to make rose oil. Okay. And the amount that's available on the market versus the amount of plants that are actually produced are two very different numbers. Okay, and so what I'm saying is there is a lot of synthetic out there. And as consumers, we need to be educated. Know what's in your bottle. Is it 5% essential oil? Or is it like Young Living that's 100% essential oil that's in your bottle? Is it synthetic and toxic? Or is it something that's healthy for your body? Very, very important. So the unfortunate thing about the industry, while I'm still frustrated with that, oftentimes, if I run a batch, I cook one batch or distill one batch of essential oil, ultimately that's going to go in a large tank of maybe 1,000 liters of oil, right? In the industry, typically, the general practice is to add it all to the whole big 1,000 gallons and then test the 1,000 gallons once to make sure it passes. That's the industry standard, right? Young Living doesn't do that. We run a batch and we'll get anywhere from about 1/3 of a liter of oil to maybe 7 liters of oil, depending on the crop that's being distilled, right? And we'll test every single batch. If an individual batch does not pass test number 14 or whichever test, then it does not make it into the larger barrel. So we test every single batch to ensure that every oil that is a part of the final mix passes its spec. And then we also test the final batch.
Thank you so much for your sharing today, David. I'm just blown away by the amount of information and knowledge, and very impressed and amazed, and to know that Young Living as a company, as an organization, we are really doing the right thing for our people and for the communities within which we operate. And I'm just so proud to be here. Thank you so much, David. Thank you.